Hi, thank you for joining our Roundup Ready Technologies Accreditation Training webinar. My name is Gina Engeldow and I'm in the marketing team at Bayer. Today's session will provide accreditation, a key step for growing Bayer's Roundup Ready and TruFlex canola. During this presentation, we'll have Hugh Trenorden, Bayer's Business Development Manager in the West, Tim Murphy, Bayer's Market Development Agronomist in South Australia, and Donald Ben, Bayer's Marketing Manager for Seeds, Traits and Roundup, all presenting. Donnie Ben will provide a deeper dive into GM canola marketing or grain marketing, particularly for South Australia at the end of this presentation. So stay on for that if you're interested. I'll give you a bit of background on all three presenters in a moment, but first I'll run through some housekeeping. We have an accompanying accreditation guide that will contain information that is in this presentation today, and it's available for download via the blue button with the downward arrow at the top of your screen. Where applicable, slides will refer to the reference page in the booklet. If you have any questions, please reach out to your local Bayer Territory Business Manager that can be found at crop.bayer.com.au under Tools and selecting Find a Rep, or please email canola.business@bayer.com. If you haven't requested a license and stewardship agreement when you registered for this webinar and would like to, please email that same email address, canola.business@bayer.com, to request one. I'll give you a bit of background on Hugh, Donnie and Tim now. So Hugh's ag career began back on his family farm in Wildcatcham. After several years managing the operation, Hughie transitioned away from the still operational business to the farm input sector, landing firmly on his feet in the canola industry. Hugh was initially employed by a plant breeding company as a sales agronomist. In May 2017, Hugh pursued his interest in seed trait technology, taking on the role of regional sales manager with Monsanto. Hugh has been an interested participant in Bayer's acquisition of Monsanto, and during this time, his role has evolved into National Canola Sales Manager and onto Bayer's Business Development Manager. This has expanded Hugh's knowledge of the New South Wales and Victorian agriculture and canola processing sectors. Tim Murphy works in the market development team as a market development agronomist, focusing on broadacre cropping, but also dabbles in horticulture. Having been with Bayer now for 22 years, mainly in North Queensland, working in tropical horticulture crops, Tim made this transition to South Australia 3 seasons ago. His work within the market development team has him working in all stages of the canola crop, and whilst 2021 is the first season Tim is working with GM canola, he has travelled in previous seasons to view trials in other states. Tim mainly conducts trial work to fit new and existing products into day-to-day production systems and is conducting a number of trials in the 2021 season with TruFlex and Roundup Ready canola. Donnie Ben started at Bayer over 6 years ago. He started as canola territory business manager in the East, transitioning to marketing manager over 2 years ago. Donnie has an extensive knowledge in the canola industry and has a particular interest in GM canola marketing. I'll hand over to Hugh now.
As Gina mentioned, we're going through the accreditation session today. The chapters outlined in front of you now are actually the same chapters in the accreditation workbook. So I would really strongly recommend that you download the accreditation workbook. As we go through the slides, there's even pages referenced that you can look to if you'd like some more information. It really is a handy guide for you to have if you want a bit more information to look back on after this session. So with that, we'll kick off with our first chapter, which is coexistence, segregation, and grain marketing. So coexistence is important because it ensures growers can grow GM and non-GM canola. At Bayer, we're in the business of offering options to growers for things like crop protection. So it really is key that growers can choose to grow GM or non-GM canola. Pleasingly, this has been successfully managed in New South Wales, Victoria and WA since commercial planning started in 2009. Although it has been shown that it can be managed quite successfully, there are some important things that growers need to think about to ensure that coexistence works well. That is maintaining separation distances between GM and non-GM canola crops, adhering to industry-approved adventitious presence thresholds, and grain segregation. So adventitious presence is a bit of a tongue twister. It's a big word, but what it actually means is it's the unintentional mixing of trace amounts of seed and grain and other products from one plant type with another. This can occur through a variety of ways: pollen movement, volunteers, mixing during harvesting, transport, storage and processing, or even human error or accidents. To expect an adventitious presence of absolute zero is neither realistic or economically possible. So in line with global and industry approved levels, the maximum acceptable level of GM canola allowed in seed or grain of non-GM type is 0.9% for seed or grain, and for planting seed, it's 0.5%. So, you know, the mechanical mixing of products, as mentioned, you know, this can happen in your sort of seed storage areas if you're sort of using them for both for grain and for storing seed. So they need to be thoroughly cleaned out every time they're used for GM and non-GM canola. Also, planting equipment's another spot where you also need to do a thorough clean out both prior to planting GM canola and afterwards. And also when harvesting grain, it's important that you're really cleaning out when sort of moving from one grain type to another. This is something that growers do routinely. They understand the importance of grain, of good hygiene for their grain production. So so it's something that can be managed and has been in other jurisdictions. So separation distances is something that that is a requirement in our system. So one part of that is it's good to be a good neighbour, to give neighbours a bit of room, which is 5 metres from one to stop one crop type moving into another. Would always recommend that you have good communications with your neighbours, especially if there is any sensitivity about what crops, what management practices you're doing on your property. I think that's best practice to do that. So the 5 metres does help with maintaining the 0.9% adventitious presence. This can be obtained. It might be sort of of the boundary line of your property. It could be a fire break, a fence line, another fire break would equal 5 metres, or if it's sort of internal, you can actually plant sort of one canola type right up to the other time, as long as you really successfully mark that line of delineation. But when you went to harvest that grain, you would have to take the first 5 metres of the non-GM and place that with GM stack. That could even be 12 metres with a CCF system. And then, as mentioned before, if you did a thorough blowdown of your harvest and grain storage equipment and tracking, then moved into your non-GM canola, you'd be able to maintain that 0.9% adventitious presence level. Another thing to be mindful of is leave yourself 400 metres if you're going to be retaining some, say, open pollinated canola or something like that from your GM canola. And I will mention that as part of the licensing and stewardship agreement, the requirements are that all GM canola needs to be delivered for end use. That you cannot retain any GM canola seed from one year to the next, which also helps with coexistence. With the levels of separation distance that is based on science. So, canola will happily self-pollinate within the same plant or same flower, but there is also potential for pollen to move from one plant to another. The data shows actually that level of outcrossing is quite low. It's already below the 0.9% adventitious presence level. As we move it past 5 metres, it's even lower, and when we get to 400 metres, it's extremely low. So that's the basis of having 5 metres buffer from one canola type to the other, with producing grain, and the 400 metres for the seed production in non-GM canola. So another thing that growers need to be mindful of is when they deliver their canola seed. If they're growing both GM and non-GM canola, it is a grower's requirement to deliver the grain into as the specifications require. So the two main specifications in canola in Australia are the first one is say CS01A, the first one is CS01. So Viterra, Grain Corp and CBH sort of name this CAG canola. That's what we call GM canola. So that's all canola types. It doesn't matter if it's GM or non-GM or what percentage of all, as long as it meets the the grain specifications that those grain handlers put on it. The other canola type is something that's sold internationally as CS01A. Viterra, Grain Corp and CBH called it canned canola. So it's the same quality parameters as CAG canola, but it does have an adventitious presence level of under 0.9% for GM. So growers, if they had a mixed load, would need to declare that as CAG. And if they do all the management processes that are outlined before, then they can successfully deliver their non-GM canola as can, and if there is a price differential, they can benefit in that. So on the selling of the grain, Bayer, where we offer the technology for weed control, but I understand that selling your grain is an important part of the process, and we do offer some tools to help with that. So the first one I'll mention is Grain Gauge. So that's an app that shows the advertised site pricing at your local receival site, and it's not just for canola; it's for all grain types. So I'm sure you're all getting marketing information from somewhere, but this is another option that you can download and have a look at. So yeah, Grain Gauge is something I'd recommend you go on to your app store and see if you can get that. And the GM Canola Market Wire is a periodic newsletter that Bayer put out by email. This is a really handy source of information to understand how the fundamentals of GM canola are comparing to, say, non-GM and other crop types. So I would recommend that you go onto our website, which is roundupreadycanola.com.au, and you sort of follow the prompts to receive that newsletter. So while I'm talking about the news about our website, you can also on the website find our crop management plan. So our crop management plan highlights all the key aspects of coexistence. So please go on there and have a look if that is of interest to you, or if you need some more information. And I'll be talking about resistance management a bit later in this accreditation, and that resistance management plan is also on the website, roundupreadycanola.com.au. You can also find receivable sites on our website where it has been advertised that GM canola is being taken for delivery. Okay, so regulatory approvals and GM legislation is another chapter in the workbook you could have a look at. With GM canola, we're governed by some federal government bodies that have an overview on how we can use this technology, and they sort of place a lot of the rules and regulations that we adhere to growing GM canola. So those regulatory bodies are the Office of Gene Technology Regulator, the APVMA, or Food and Safety Australia, New Zealand. So that's a very robust regulatory system, and states in Australia are accepting of that and don't have any sort of state monitoria regulating what can be grown in their jurisdictions, so that they're just happy to take what those federal agencies sort of adhere to and run with that. The other states do have monitoria in their state, and South Australia have just started their journey to be able to allow GM canola crops to move into their jurisdiction. The one caveat with that is Kangaroo Island is a GM-free area still, as is Tasmania and the ACT. So what are Roundup Ready technologies? So Roundup Ready technologies enable canola plants to tolerate applications of Roundup Ready herbicides through the use of gene technology. Roundup Ready canola has been available to Australian growers since 2008. TruFlex canola with Roundup Ready technology is Bayer's second generation weed control trait. New advances in trait technology enable better weed control through flexibility in both rates and timings for Roundup Ready herbicide applications. So how do they really work? I find the easiest way to explain how TruFlex canola works is firstly sort of explaining how Roundup Ready canola works. So with Roundup Ready canola, we had to place 2 genes into it to get the desired tolerance to glyphosate. So one gene was inserting a protein called the CP4 EPSPS protein into the plant, and what that protein does is it kind of acts like a bridge that overcomes the amino acid block that glyphosate uses to starve a plant. With Roundup Ready canola, it was deemed that that protein expression was such that a second gene would be needed, and that was a GOX gene, which broke the glyphosate down into 2 acids. So the additive effect of both those genes gives us the desired tolerance to Roundup Ready technologies. So with TruFlex canola, we're actually using the same pathway or the same mechanism of inserting that CP4 EPSPS protein, but through the use of promoter sequences, we've been able to put that protein into the plant in a lot higher numbers and for a longer duration into the plant. So essentially that little bridge that we put into Roundup Ready has turned into sort of a 4-lane highway, just to use that analogy, and there's no need for that second gene being the GOX gene. So what does that allow? So it allows more flexibility on when we can spray our crops with Roundup products. So with Roundup Ready canola, the sprays, and I'd always recommend 2 sprays, and Tim Murphy will go into more on why that is later on. But yeah, 2 sprays of Roundup on before the 6th leaf stage. With TruFlex canola, there's more flexibility there that you can get your sprays on up until first flower, which gives you at least a couple of weeks window there to make sure that you're applying the herbicide at the most critical point. So As I mentioned, TruFlex canola, there is a fair bit of flexibility. So when using over-the-top products, you can choose 2 different types of Roundup. So the Roundup Ready herbicide with Plant Shield is our granular product. It's at 690 grams per kilogram active loading, and that's been in the market as long as Roundup Ready canola has been. We've also introduced the Roundup Ready Performance Liquid, or PL. So that's that is a liquid formulation which suits some people if they want to use say 1,000 litre IBC. It's slightly different loading with 540 grams per litre active, and the rates between the 2 products reflect the different loadings. So with Roundup Ready canola, as mentioned, you should apply 2 applications before the 6-leaf timing, and you can use 0.9 kilograms per hectare of Roundup Ready herbicide granule, or 1.15 litres per hectare of the liquid formulation Roundup Ready PL. Now with TruFlex canola, you've got a bit of a choice. You can either go with a with 2 application spraying, or a 3 application spraying, and that'll be determined by your weed profile and conditions throughout the year. So if choosing a 2 spray timings, you can increase your rate of glyphosate, which is beneficial if you might have some larger or hard to kill weeds in your population when you go to spray. So you can go up to 1.13 kilograms per hectare of the Roundup Ready herbicide granule, or 1.67 litres per hectare of the liquid formulation Roundup Ready PL. With TruFlex canola, as mentioned, you can go with the 3 spray strategy, and then you sort of just go back to the same rates as what you can use for Roundup Ready canola, being the 0.9 kilograms per hectare of the Roundup Ready herbicide granule, or the 1.15 Roundup Ready Performance. I'll now let Murph, who by chance is the good-looking one in this photo, talk more about Roundup Ready technologies in the field. Over to you, Murph.
Now, what we're looking at here is the benefits of using the TruFlex traits in your system. As illustrated on the left, when you use a higher rate of Roundup Ready with Plant Shield on young canola at that 4-leaf stage, plants with the TruFlex trait in there are able to withstand that treatment and show no side effects from it. Whilst on the left-hand side there of that photo, the Roundup Ready trait canola has actually expressed some visual biomass reduction and a little bit of crop bleaching. So that additional trait is that they're able to stand higher rates whilst they are above label rate and not recommended. It just shows that robustness of that trait. In regards to the photo there on the right-hand side, Hugh's discussed with you the ability to spray a TruFlex canola right up until that first flower emerges. And what we see with the TruFlex is that there is no impact on that flower when you spray slightly later, as illustrated here, because when you've got that Roundup Ready trait only, we can see some of that, some level of floral bleaching on there. But in the TruFlex system, there is none of that bleaching, and everything goes on quite happily. So what I want to look at now is how to, what sort of level of control you get in field under what I call a stress test system. So when I refer to stress test, I say with no pre-emergent out applied prior to seeding, and just allowing for those in crops to do your control. What we're seeing here is that when you apply the Roundup Ready herbicide with Plant Shield, we're able to provide effective control of weeds within crop. And when compared to a TT system, and also when comparing spraying early and with on a young population, whether it be a Roundup Ready technology or the TruFlex technology, you can see that no matter what we do, we get some level of control. And this is evident in this graph here by the more applications we put on, whether it be the 2-leaf and the 2-leaf plus the 4 to 6 leaf spray, we're getting very good control. Interesting little point in this graph is that you can see there where we've done the 3 spray system. So 1 at 2-leaf, 1 at that 4-leaf early bolting, and then a first flower emergence. We're not seeing a great benefit or a greater benefit to of level of control or reduction in that, the ryegrass in the block. But what that could be is simply we have not had that late flush. And that's the biggest advantage of the TruFlex system, that if you get that late flush of ryegrass in the crop, you're able to get that, that control on. What I want to look at now is going into how does this fit in the field? How do we apply and how do we integrate that into your system, your production system, and what we'd like to see out in the paddock this season? So let's look at it in field. When we went through sort of looking at how we might be able to integrate these technologies in, we looked at a production system and we set up several trials in 2019 to look at the way to integrate this in incorporation, the use of a pre-emergent herbicide. So in this case here, permazimide. In these sites, we compared both, well, all triazine tolerant varieties in amongst with the Roundup Ready and the TruFlex systems, looking at the level of control that you gain and the, as illustrated in this graph here, the annual ryegrass panicle reductions. Under the TT system, we're able to provide a level of panicle reduction there, whether it be with a pre-emergent up front or with the TruFlex systems, where we also had the pre-emergent up front, we got some really good reduction there with and without the over-the-top spray. When we then take one step further and go into that, the use of the Roundup Ready and the TruFlex systems, integrating a pre-emergent herbicide in that, we can see we gain a greater level of control. Right up to the point there where we've got the TruFlex system with 3 applications, including a pre-emergent herbicide, we're getting full control in. And as demonstrated in the last graph I spoke about, there wasn't very high level of in-crop rainfall prior to full competition from the crop. And as a result, we didn't get that late germination of ryegrass. So therefore, once again, that 3rd spray wasn't necessary. Under a TruFlex system, if you've got that emergence, you can come in there and treat it. And under the Roundup Ready, you will not be able to come in there and get that spray on if you get that late germination. So that's probably the difference. The one thing we really want to stress in this system is to always use a pre-em with these products. Don't rely on just a in-crop sprays, but use a full integrated approach, and you'll find you'll get superior levels of weed control in crop and be able to get on top of some of these weed issues we've got. So Huey, I think that is me pretty well done, and thank you. I'll hand back to yourself.
All right, thanks Murph for that insight. So the next part of our accreditation is controlling volunteer canola. So with any cropping system, our combines only aren't able to get 100% of the seeds from the field. It's if you're sort of between 1% and 2% harvest losses for canola, I think you're doing a pretty reasonable job, but that still means that there are some sort of seeds of volunteers that will continue in following rainfall events. Again, experience from the last sort of 10 years in New South Wales, Victoria and WA are, this is a problem that can be managed. You just need to sort of have a little bit of thought about it. So when you're controlling volunteer canola, it's always best to target a smaller weed before it gets under stressed conditions. So that's the same for any sort of herbicide application. And just be mindful that glyphosate on its own will not control all of your volunteers, because some of that glyphosate will continue to the progeny. And I would also say that it might be a small percentage of adventitious presence of all the herbicide tolerances available with canola in any sort of canola line. So I would be using 2 lethal modes of action outside the known tolerances to canola, and then you will have a successful result. In your workbook, there is a table that comes from the Australian Oilseeds Federation that gives brand names of different chemicals that could be used in different sort of parts of the cropping sequence. Or please reach out to to our market development agronomists such as Tim Murphy around the country, or people like myself. We can help you with controlling volunteers if needed. Okay, so herbicide resistance. It's important that we look after all our tools that we have available to us. At Bayer, we own the Roundup brand, which comes with a high amount of value, but it also means that that we have a responsibility as well to be as good as stewards to glyphosate as we possibly can be. In my own situation, I really do value glyphosate in our farming systems, and although I assume that sort of every paddock could potentially have a small percentage of glyphosate resistant individuals in them, by having a integrated weed management plan, I feel that we can continue to sort of manage those resistance without numbers building up too quickly. So the resistance management principles that we'd like our growers to adhere to would be to enter any sort of cropping rotation with a low weed burden. Would like someone to integrate as many different weed control options, chemical or cultural, as possible throughout the phases in the crop rotation. Make every herbicide count. Use the registered application rates at the correct weed growth stage, and assess if that application has been effective or not. Rotate herbicides with different modes of action through the crop rotation. Regularly monitor the effectiveness of the resistance management practices. Are there weeds escaping? Are they getting more or less? And if there are some escapees, test weed populations for herbicide resistance status as part of your integrated weed management plan. And if planting into a paddock with suspected glyphosate-resistant weed populations, farmers must have a plan on how to manage such weeds. So again, just because you may suspect there are some individuals tolerant to glyphosate in a paddock, that doesn't automatically rule out sort of glyphosate resistant, as long as you're using all the tools that are available to you, pre-measured chemistry or harvest weed seed control, as part of a sort of very broad rotation over the years. You can still successfully use Roundup Ready technologies in that scenario. So herbicide resistance and resistance management plans. So if you need a resistance management plan, there's one available on our website. So yeah, that's a good structure if you want to formally write something down, which is, it's always good if it is written down. And there's lots of resources out there to help you. Bayer run a Mix It Up website, which is really intriguing, where you can check via postcodes of what's happened in resistance testing to get an idea of what might be going on in your area. Or say Weed Smart, a lot of Big Six, where they talk about all the tools that you could use to combat resistance very succinctly. So yeah, that's there's lots of help out there, and if you need some help, again, please reach out. There's people that can help you with those things. And finally, keeping records. I think growers do keep good records, and it's important. It's very difficult if you're saying you're having a problem to think back over a number of years of what was actually used when and where. But if it's written down and recorded in a spray diary or however you keep your records, then you can probably look at why a weed population might be developing a certain way, and adjust your management practices to ameliorate any problems that might be happening. So how to purchase canola seed containing Roundup Ready technologies. Okay, so it's 3 simple steps. Complete a Bayer Roundup Ready Technologies user accreditation course, which is what we're currently doing now. But a grower will also need to sign a licensing and stewardship agreement. So that should be coming to you via email. Again, sort of reach out to a Bayer or your technology service provider if you're having trouble with this. And then you need to go to the technology service provider, who's a Bayer agent that is allowed to sell GM technologies, and they'll be able to help you take your seed order, which already has been ongoing. One call out is the technology service provider will not let you take physical delivery of the seed until you have signed a licensing and stewardship agreement where you've agreed to those rules and regulations placed upon us and manage the technology by those government agencies I spoke to. So just make sure you, if you do have the agreement, get that signed as a matter of importance, and then we can get the seed flowing through to you when you need it come planting time. So the varieties that there's quite a lot of choice in the market in both Roundup Ready and TruFlex. So again, talk to your technology service provider on what variety might suit you, and they'll give you a choice out of our 6 seed licensees that offer Roundup Ready canola, or some also offer TruFlex canola. So our canola seed licensees are BASF, Cargill, New Seed, Nutrien Ag Solutions, Pacific Seeds, and Pioneer. And feel free to visit their websites or contact them directly if you want to know more about their varieties. That concludes my input in this accreditation session, but I'll now hand you over to Gina to wrap the session up.
Thanks, Huey. If you're from South Australia and or are interested in finding out more about marketing your GM canola, please stay on for Donnie's presentation for another 5 minutes.
So we just wanted to spend a little bit more time going through the differences in GM canola end use markets, especially for our new South Australian growers. So the main end use markets for GM canola in South Australia are going to be bulk export and some stock feed, which will be mainly stock feed fed to chickens. So we're going to run through some key points in a bit more detail, but just up front, we really want you to be focusing on not just where the closest delivery point is, but who you're selling to, who the trader is, and what their end use market is, because there will be differences there between the drivers for the GM versus non-GM differential with different end use markets. And obviously then it's really important to understand what those drivers are. And that is one of the best things about the GM canola market wire. The other key points are speak to traders early. So, as early as you possibly can, understand who the buyers are, research the pricing as early as possible. We really don't want people to wait until harvest. So talking a little bit more about the different end use markets. So bulk export. is going to be the major end-use market for the South Australian growers. And the main export destinations for that bulk export market are going to be China, Pakistan, and Japan. Now, a really key thing to keep in mind for bulk export markets is that whenever you're loading a boat, or a trader is loading a boat, they need to fill a hatch. And on a Panamax, a hatch is typically 9,000 to 10,000 tonnes. So when growers are sort of making planning decisions around a port zone, that's a really simple metric that you should keep in the front of your mind. And that's something that will help improve transparency about, which I'll talk a little bit more about again. But 9,000 to 10,000 tonnes is really that critical mass that the market will require to service those GM canola end-use markets. Quick note on the price spread. So the major differential for the price spread on a bulk export market is the difference between the European and the China canola prices. And this is because typically Europe will pay a premium for non-GM. That doesn't mean they don't import any GM canola. Europe do import GM canola from Canada and from Australia. So there is a little bit of a myth out there sometimes that Europe don't take any GM canola. That is not true, they do. But because of the market in Europe, in some use cases, they will pay a premium for non-GM. And then the other major player in a bulk export market is China, and they don't typically have a preference. So that's the main number that we look to for the driver between the GM and non-GM price differential. And it's a good thing that that Lockstock do in the market wire in every edition. And I've just got a little screenshot of it there on the bottom left. They convert the European and the China prices to an Australian track equivalent in Australian dollars. And that way you can sort of quickly and easily see the spread over the last sort of relative time period to see how things are changing versus China and Europe, and what you would expect that to reflect in the Australian GM prices. The graph on the right shows an overview of Australia's total canola production and then the amount of export business that we do. And I'll just put that up there just to provide a bit more detail about our typical bulk export markets for the entire canola market, and then highlighting the countries that we typically think of as happy to take GM canola. So highlighted in grey and black are the European destinations. So typically they're focused on for a non-GM market because buyers can get a premium there. Like I said, that doesn't mean they only take non-GM, they will take GM as well. But in the sort of the blue and the green bars there, we've highlighted those other nations that really don't have a huge preference one way or the other. So obviously China's in there, Japan, Pakistan, Bangladesh also features. So it's the main thing we want to highlight here is, yes, you can see over the years we can have a bulk export market that is focused on the European countries, and that's why we typically can see some premiums for non-GM, but certainly there is a home and demand there for GM canola. So stock feed is the other market I was talking about. So I'll just shrink this off a little bit here so you can see the thing in the background. So stock feed is mainly focused on chickens. So chickens do eat GM canola either as a meal or as a whole grain. Just by the location of the chicken farms in South Australia, it's really going to suit growers in the east of South Australia more so than growers to the west and on the Eyre Peninsula. It is a really good opportunity too for growers that have on-farm storage, because in New South Wales and Victoria, where we also see strong demand from the chicken market, because chickens obviously don't need all their canola in one hit, and they will take it throughout the year as they need it. You will find there'll be offers out there where you'll get premiums to carry GM canola throughout the year, and some buyers will even pay you storage fees or carry for every month you carry it past a certain month. So it's typical to see offers out there from some buyers that will pay sort of $3.50 a tonne per month carry on top, and you'll essentially get an ex-farm price. for your GM canola. So that can suit people if they have that on-farm storage capability. This market will be limited just purely by the fact of the number of chickens. They can only eat so much canola. So we don't mean to eclipse the importance that this has on the bulk export market. Really, bulk export is going to be the #1 in use market, but the chickens are certainly a good option there as well for some growers. So now I just want to talk about how Bayer can add value to the entire supply chain and what we've done in the other states to help provide value to growers and the other players in the supply chain. So if you can imagine a trader and then receival sites at the end of the supply chain, if they're looking at a new GM canola market, obviously for South Australia, and ignoring Bayer down here at the bottom, if they're trying to ascertain, well, how much GM canola is planted, like where is it, how much is there, and what does that mean in terms of what I'm planning for my sort of customers and my export campaign. So if they then need to sort of roll back and talk to a heap of growers, and then also collectively, try and collect information of distribution and agronomists, and even the seed companies at the end of the chain, obviously there's a lot of players there, and there's a lot of conversations that would need to be had to really get a good idea about exactly how many hectares are planted out there and exactly where it is. And it's really simple stuff because of the way that our license is set up with the OGTR and our reporting requirements. Every single kilogram of GM canola that's planted gets reported to us, and we obviously, taking care of everyone's privacy, anonymize that information so you can't see individual farms, but we can provide really clear transparency nice and easily to all these receival sites and all these traders to be like, this is exactly how many hectares were planted this year, and these are the sort of LGA zones where they're planted. So they get really clear, transparent information about what that opportunity looks like and what that means for them when they're making plans around segregations and what countries they can export to and what sort of quantities that they can typically expect from the marketplace in different port zones. And I'll take you through some examples of what that looks like. So in WA, I'm using WA as an example, but this is an example of some of the data that we will provide to traders and receival sites. So we'll put it out for them on a map. We'll typically compare the current planting year versus the previous year, so they can see which areas have shifted compared to the old crop that they've just seen gone. And then we'll get into a bit more detail. We'll provide them sort of very granular maps about what that looks like for each area, so that this is really helpful when you're looking at segregations. Obviously, we'll do that for the whole state, and then we'll obviously accompany those maps with the actual breakdown of hectares, the raw number comparing the previous year to the current year. And this is absolute gold to those traders and receival sites, and makes their lives a lot easier and gives them really clear, transparent information for them to base their own decisions on. And obviously, it's a really good relationship forming exercise for us. It's a good way for Bayer to be able to add value to growers, because we will be out there sharing that information with them, and then taking their feedback from those meetings, saying, okay, well, where do you plan on having your segregations? What sort of export program are you looking to run? Do you have prices that we're able to share with growers? Can we put them in the market wire? All those sort of really simple things that just help improve communication and transparency. And I just want to be really clear about the fact that we are out there and we are keen to make sure that all growers growing GM canola are well supported, and that obviously I'm not trying to discourage growers contacting receival sites and traders as well. Obviously, the more people that are talking, the better. All the information shouldn't just be coming from us, but I did want to explain where we sort of fit into that whole system. So, as I was talking about before, and thinking about a bit forward to South Australia, and the sort of data that we'll be looking to share with traders prior to having planting information, and then how we'll track open orders that we get visibility on from obviously distribution and what we call TSPs and our seed licensees. So using the Yorke Peninsula and the Mid-North as an example, obviously I said to you before, for bulk export, we need a minimum of 10,000 tonnes so you can fill a hatch. And this is data from Neil Clark, and we have received some feedback that some of these yield averages in the tonnes per hectare here are a little bit lower, but for the purpose of this exercise, it's better to be on the low side than the high side. But looking at the number of hectares that are available in each of these LGAs in that sort of port zone and the tonnes per hectare long-term average, working on an average tonnes per hectare of 1.4, if everyone got 1.4 tonnes in the 2021 and you needed that 10,000 tonnes to fill a hatch, then we would need 7,000 hectares of GM canola to be planted in the first year so that you met that critical mass. And that's something that we'll be tracking very closely, and where possible and relevant, we'll sort of share back with growers so that they're able to more effectively make planting decisions, whether they know that number is, small, big, in the middle. Obviously, that level of simple transparency can help people make better planning decisions. So just to sort of summarize everything that we just spoke about, so what are they going to be doing between now and planting? So obviously we'll be communicating with relevant grain handlers, but we'll be feeding back any relevant info to growers and TSPs, like I just said before, to assist with those planning decisions. And we'll do that by sort of normal communications methods in the accreditation as well. But the best one to keep an eye out for is the market wire that I've spoken about a couple of times. And then post planting to harvest, that's when we have those final planting figures. So all the GM canola hectares are reported to us and recorded in our system, which we call MTrack, on the 15th of June. So after that date, that's when we sort of create all those reports that I just showed you an example of the WA before. And we go out and we have meetings with all the receiver sites and the traders and say, okay, this is where it is. And then we use that as a chance for them to sort of say, this is our seg plans, this is our plans in general, this is the sort of offers that we might be putting out to market, and we get their permission and we'll communicate that, like I said as well, through the market wire. Some bids will also be available on Grain Gauge, and we'll update segregations on our Where to Deliver website page. So there's multiple avenues there, and they all sort of working well nicely together. So the key takeaways from everything I've just gone over. So make sure you understand the difference between the GM and non-GM and use markets. And a really good way for you to all be able to do that is to read the January 2021 edition of our market wire that lock, stock, and tailor for the New South Australian growers. And also keep the differential in perspective. Like, obviously, it's really important for everyone to understand, that there can be a differential between GM and non-GM, and there are drivers that can widen and narrow that price difference. But just as a really general rule of thumb, for every tonne to the hectare of yield, a $25 a tonne price differential can be overcome by an additional 50 kilos to the hectare. So in my experience in the past, certainly it does seem a bit easier to get caught up on, $25 a tonne seems like a really big number, but if you think about for every tonne of yield to the hectare, you can overcome that difference by just an additional 50 kilos in yield, whether that be from an improvement in the varieties or an improvement in weed control. It's good to keep that in perspective. Obviously, understand your options early. Do not wait until you've got it in the bin and you're driving it to the receiver side at harvest in 21. And remember to keep an eye on it, not just where the closest delivery point is, but who you're selling to and what the end use market they're going into. So that's it from me. Thanks very much. And
thanks again for joining today. If you have any questions or want to request a license and stewardship agreement and haven't already, please contact us via the Find a Rep tool on our website at crop.bayer.com.au or by emailing the email address on the screen, canola.business@bayer.com. Thanks again.